Now, I would like to give the floor to our Nikita Polishchuk, because he gave us the opportunity. He was called by many of our colleagues in order to describe the fiscal incentive for the regional headquarters in the areas that we have till now mentioned, with focus on Greater China. Indeed, we will discuss about Singapore, because it's a rising star. Let's say it's a coming back. It's a coming back places. We will see India, Vietnam, UAE, and we will have some comparison. In fact, following the presentation of our colleagues, we will have a chart of what really the CEOs or the project manager wants to know in order to decide which one are the next destination. Let's say that till now we have been discussing about the hardware of the cities and the country. Now with Nikita, we will discuss about the software, so incentives, subsidies, and the taxation of this country. Nikita is with the PHC Advisory Tax Accounting since a couple of years. He advises our clients on the tax and other financial related issue in APAC area. And indeed, is being able to speak different languages, is also helping assisting our clients in the FDI in these important markets that we are discussing today. Please, Nikita, give us a quick overview of the fiscal incentives available for foreign companies in different countries. And please let us know with your crystal ball which one is the best of it. Nikita, the floor is yours.
Absolutely, absolutely, Carlo. Thank you very much for the introduction. And good morning, good afternoon to our viewers and to all of our speakers. It's my pleasure to be here. And actually, in my speech, which I believe is the last one for today, I would like to nicely wrap up everything said today about the regions that we have been discussing, and in particular focus on those fiscal incentives for regional headquarters that foreign investors are particularly keen on. From our experience, we know that when foreign companies are actually deciding on the destination to expand overseas, they not only look at the profitability of their potential markets, but also what can they get back from the authorities? What are those attractive and those like sappy incentives that they can get? This is an important question for them. So I would like to focus on the fiscal incentives in the geographies that we have been describing, as well as mention Singapore, because it's, as Carlo mentioned, this is an important destination for those regional headquarters here in Asia. So I will start with a very brief introduction of regional headquarters. Actually, I will use those definitions presented by Matteo earlier, especially which are relevant here in Shanghai. I would like to focus first on China and go later to Singapore, focus on the emerging markets such as Vietnam and India, and finish with the UAE, which is basically the regional headquarter hub for those doing business in the Middle East and North Africa. So first, just to give once again a very brief understanding of what is a regional headquarter. Basically, it is a head office which is established by a parent overseas company, established in the form of investment to conduct management functions. So those could be, the essentially management of the other subsidiaries in the region, in the country, fund management, etc., etc. Regional headquarters, generally they're established as an investment holding company or a management company, which of course has an independent legal status. Let me start talking about China first. As previously mentioned, indeed, regional headquarters in China can be set up anywhere. But of course, Shanghai stands first among the mainland cities in terms of total amount of foreign direct investment, in terms of its competitiveness, in terms of its attractiveness for overseas enterprises. Of course, it's also the financial center of China, so there are opportunities to obtain the necessary financing from the global financial institutions, both domestic and overseas, which are present here. Indeed, the authorities of Shanghai actually encourage investment by multinationals to establish those regional headquarters by offering a number of tax incentives and subsidies. So let me just introduce the subsidies, which actually are relevant for those regional headquarters here in Shanghai. The first one are so-called rent subsidies. So the companies which qualify for the status of the regional headquarters can receive 30% of the total rent subsidy for 3 years. There are certain requirements in terms of how big, for example, an office can be. So of course there is a cap on these subsidies. Nevertheless, this is an attractive point for many companies here in Shanghai. There are other subsidies such as startup subsidies. So for new businesses, again, which have met the requirements which Matteo has previously mentioned to qualify for the regional headquarters status, indeed they can receive, for example, an amount of RMB 5 million, which is paid generally in 3 installments. They can receive these startup subsidies. The next one is performance-related subsidies. And this relates to how well the regional headquarters is doing in terms of its revenue. So we can see that there are 3 categories. And the first one being if the turnover of the company is within half a billion Chinese RMB or 1 billion Chinese RMB, basically the company shall receive the RMB 5 million subsidies. For the next step, if the turnover is between 1 billion RMB and 1.5 billion RMB, there will be an additional 3 million RMB of subsidies. And finally, for those whose turnover exceeds 1.5 billion RMB, an additional 2 million RMB of subsidies will be granted. So these are actually quite significant and attractive policies for the regional headquarters here in Shanghai. And lastly, those subsidies related to upgrading the status of regional headquarters. So for example, from just one country to, let's say, upgrading your headquarters to Asia Pacific region to cover more jurisdictions and countries, they may be granted an additional lump sum payment subsidy of RMB 3 million. And I would like to just briefly mention that there are additional subsidies on tax incentives as well, which generally have to be, let's say, negotiable on the individual basis, which include, for example, tax reduction or exemption on certain things, as well as facilitation of research and development activities here in Shanghai. For example, using the additional, super deduction for expenses, et cetera, and of course the protection of intellectual property rights, which is basically invaluable for foreign investors here in China. And now moving forward, I would like to mention Hong Kong. And technically speaking, Hong Kong does not really offer any specific incentives for regional headquarters. Nevertheless, they have a program which aims to attract multinationals to establish something called Corporate Treasury Center, or CTC, in the region. What is a CTC? A CTC is generally, let's say, it's a bank within a company. So it's a bank which serves the purpose to, let's say, finance, offer borrowing, lending, offer liquidity management, payment processing, risk management, and other services to other companies within the group. So by establishing the CTC in Hong Kong, the multinationals can actually, obtain certain preferential tax treatment. And this is the tax treatment. So first of all, offering an income tax rate of 8.25%, which is the 50% reduction of the standard rate of 16.5% in Hong Kong, to specify treasury activities of qualifying corporate treasury centers. Secondly is the allowing interest deduction for intra-group lending if, again, certain conditions are met. These conditions are pretty strict, I have to say, in order actually to qualify for this CTC, Corporate Treasury Center. A number of criteria should be met, and these rules do not apply to financial institutions. So we are talking about, actually multinationals, providing non-financial services in the jurisdictions of Hong Kong and others. And I would like to mention that in order to qualify again for Corporate Treasury Center, actually there should be substantial business activity conducted in Hong Kong itself, which means you need to hire people, you need to rent offices, you need to participate there on the ground. So you cannot just establish an offshore company there and conduct these financing activities to other companies within your group. No, it means that you should be there in Hong Kong in order to qualify for the status of Corporate Treasury Center. And of course, I cannot just omit Singapore whatsoever from here as we are moving forward in our discussion of the, let's say, Asia Pacific. Singapore actually has certain specific policies related just for regional headquarters. Indeed, Singapore has seen a huge inflow FDI in the previous years, in the previous decades, actually, many companies have established their Asia-Pacific regional headquarters and actually have preferred Singapore, sometimes even over to Hong Kong. These two specific policies for the regional headquarters in Hong Kong in Singapore, are the following. The first one is so-called Regional Headquarter Award, which offers a concessionary tax rate of 15% for 5 years on qualifying income from abroad for Asia-Pacific regional headquarters. So the standard rate is 17%, so you will have a reduction by 2%. And the last one is the second one is the International Headquarter Award, where for those companies for whom exceed the minimum requirements to qualify for the Regional Headquarter Award, they may see even further reduction in the corporate tax rate in Singapore from down to 5%. So the highest one can be the 15% and down to 5% reduction in the tax rate. Now moving forward to the other, let's say, new emerging economies for setting up your regional headquarters centers, I would like to focus on Vietnam. And I have these wonderful pictures here of Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City. And of course, as Carlo Fabrizi has mentioned previously, indeed, Vietnam has seen a huge inflow of FDI in the past years and will likely see this in the coming future. So in Vietnam, the standard corporate income tax rate is set at 20%, but a number of businesses can be entitled to actually preferential rates down to 17, 15, or 10% based on different criteria, different scenarios, essentially. The duration of those preferential rates may differ from a specified period of time, or it can last the entire life project. And on this slide, I have listed some of the key, let's say, sectors, locations, and other, size. Basically, these 3 criteria, what kind of businesses might be interested in setting up their regional headquarters in Vietnam. So the first one is for the sectors I have mentioned: high-tech, automobiles, clothes, footwear, education, training, healthcare, sports, culture, environment, and of course, as mentioned previously, agriculture and agriculture-related businesses. All of these will likely actually receive some forms of subsidies, some forms of preferential tax rates from the authorities in Vietnam. The second one is the location. So if a foreign let's say a foreign enterprise would like to set up its head office, its regional headquarters in Vietnam, and chooses to do so in certain areas, such as their so-called difficult socioeconomic condition areas, or extremely difficult socioeconomic condition areas, as well as industrial parks, then they may be granted, again, certain reduction of tax rate, certain exemption from tax completely. So, of course, these, again, are on the individual basis, and negotiation with the relevant authorities, either of the industrial park or those difficult socioeconomic areas, will be necessary. And the last one is the size. So those are for very large, which in fact we're actually discussing here, the multinationals, for very large manufacturing projects with investment of more than 6 trillion Vietnamese dong, which is 259 million United States dollars, or even larger ones, 12 trillion Vietnamese dongs, which is 517 million United States dollars. And those which bring technology into Vietnam, which hire local people, which expand the infrastructure, they will again be granted additional tax benefits and maybe subsidies as well. And then next, moving forward to India. In fact, India has, again, similar to Vietnam, has seen a huge inflow of FDI, and they also offer a number of incentives, but actually I would say on a larger scale. So for example, for startups, those startups which are established in India, which actually, once again, create a certain technology, so high-tech startups, they may be granted certain benefits, certain fiscal benefits, such as tax holidays for 3 consecutive years in respect to 100% of their profits, as well as additional, let's say, benefits, such as fast tracking for patent applications with 80% rebate. Other benefits include activities of companies doing export, so deduction of 100% of profits and gains derived from export business for first 5 years of commencement for tax purposes, and 50% of profits and gains derived from export business for the next 5 years. Again, similar to China, R&D deduction. So R&D, the deduction of R&D expenses is also very important in India. They will have a tax deduction of 200% on the R&D expenditures in those approved in-house facilities. So you must meet certain requirements once again. So we also recommend to make sure that you understand the full regulations of the local authorities in India to make sure that you can qualify for those super deduction of expenses for R&D. And the last one, there are a number of additional, I would say, also negotiable incentives, such as tax holidays, as well as capital expenditure deductions for the new investment, for the new technology, which is done in India. And of course, this will also be will differ based on sector and based on location. And I would like to finish here with the UAE as a hub for your regional headquarters in the Middle East, as well as North Africa. So as my colleague Veronica has mentioned, indeed, the UAE has very many preferential and attractive policies. And despite the fact it doesn't have a special policy designated for the regional headquarters, the local tax regime is already so friendly that actually setting up the regional headquarters there is kind of a no-brainer anyway. So the first one I would like to mention is the sales tax. Indeed, there is a 5% of the VAT introduced in the UAE in 2018 on a federal level, but it doesn't apply for basically transactions which are happening with the jurisdictions which are outside of the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. The next one is the corporate income tax. There has been a big news at the start of the year when the UAE basically from 2023 they will introduce the corporate income tax rate of 9%. Again, currently it is set at 0%. This is done in order to meet the global requirements and the standards of international taxation. Nevertheless, this will only apply once again on domestic transactions. So this is also something to keep in mind. Other preferential taxation regimes, policies include the absence of withholding tax on dividends, on interest and royalties. So which is essential for if your headquarter office is based somewhere else. Let's say in Europe, for example, and you would like to repatriate some profits, the absence of any withholding tax is very, very welcome. And finally, the UAE doesn't apply any capital gains, any inheritance, any gift and net worth taxes. And why is that important? It's important for several reasons, especially for businesses. It's important for businesses engaged in the wealth management, into private wealth, serving high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals who actually have shifted some of their assets in the UAE in order to benefit from this preferential tax regime. And finally, these are the key takeaways from my presentation. And let me just briefly summarize. So for example, focusing on mainland China and Shanghai in particular, indeed, we have seen it as the hub for the regional headquarters, which offers a number of subsidies, which offer a number of tax incentives. But nevertheless, in order to actually qualify for this, you have to meet certain requirements, and these are essentially for very large multinational companies to meet these requirements. Then talking about Hong Kong, it is the corporate treasury center. I mean, absolutely, they offer tax incentives of reduction of 50% of your corporate tax. It doesn't offer any subsidies, and to qualify for this, again, this is just for multinational companies having very large amount of total assets, very large amount of turnover. And as I mentioned previously, you actually have to conduct business there on the ground in Hong Kong. Singapore is actually both. I would say both can be a center for regional headquarters and corporate treasury center. Singapore offering the certain tax incentives for regional headquarters. And again, complexity is a bit difficult. In order to qualify, you have to be a multinational company, once again, contributing significant amount of investment to the local market. The next the new emerging economies for the regional headquarters, which are Vietnam and India, both don't really have, technically speaking, a certain set of policies for regional headquarters, but they have many, many preferential policies for certain industries, for certain locations. Some may actually, it says no subsidies, but actually some may offer subsidies, but generally tax incentives are available across the country. And the complexity for qualifying is not as high, and the barriers to entry are not as high as, for example, we have seen for Shanghai or Hong Kong. And lastly, the UAE, in general, there is no preferential regime for regional headquarters, but because the tax system in the UAE is already so friendly overall, in fact, this is actually a great place to set up a regional headquarters center for the activities conducting business in the Middle East and in North Africa. And that's all for my part. Thank you very much for listening. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat, and I'm available for any clarifications.
Thank you, Nikita, to give us this overview of the different approach and the different tax regime that we have in these important economies that we are studying and checking today. Indeed, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Singapore, they are well known, let's say, as a hub or a regional headquarter in order to doing business in the Southeast Asia, but as well in the Asia area. And the new one, Vietnam, India, and as well the UAE are something that we wanted to let our numerous of attendees know about it, because the opportunities are where these new incentives are coming. Thank you so much to be here with us today. I would like to thank also our friends of Eastant Communication and Events in order to organize and put together this webinar for the technical support. And please let me remind you that you may find the presentation and the videos of this webinar in our social media. And we give you a big hug. Have a good evening or good day. Depends where you follow us. Bye-bye.